Hi everyone, welcome to this new episode of Carolyn Talks. This is the podcast slash YouTube channel where I, your host, Carolyn Hines, film critic and journalist, speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today I'm very happy to be joined by two young ladies to talk about their short film, Corpse Fishing, which has shown at many film festivals around the world, including Tribeca. I have unfortunately was not able to see it there, but I got to screen it at home and I really enjoyed this film. I love films that are kind of like existentialist and have like metaphors. I love the visual and tonal metaphors. When I say tonal, I'm talking about the music in particular. And so we're going to talk about that. But this film follows Yan, who's played by Harmonie He, our lead actress, as this young woman who meets up with this man who is a corpse fisher, or in China, as they're called, as body fishers, who find the bodies of those who have died in the rivers along the Yellow River in central China. And he is lonely and he's alone and he's shunned by society. So the film talks a lot about grief, I think loneliness, judgment, social norms as well, but I think also about a little bit about economics, because like a lot of what happens is because of the economics in that region of China. And so we're going to talk about that. And I'm so happy to have Harmonie and director Jean Liu to talk about this film. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Jean, my first question for you is going to be the concept for this film is based on a real person and like the men who do this work that he's doing. And I look at it because I actually did some research on it, and the person that is most known for doing this is called his name is Wei Xinpeng, and he lives in central China. And I did some research, and the first report that I can find on this on Mr. Xinpeng is BBC original reporting in 2010. But then there were other documentaries that was done about him and other corpse fishers along the Yellow River. And then there was a second report done in 2015. So can you tell me, how did you find out about this? Because if it wasn't for this film, I would have never thought to go looking for this and to know that it existed. So talk to me about how you found out about it.
Yeah, so I used to work as a documentary producer in China, and part of a series I was working on, I was looking for people with unusual jobs that only exist in China, and in my research, I came across corpse fishers, and I was in the region a lot for other work, and so kind of once I realized that this was a real job and these people existed, I went to kind of research for myself, because I'm sure, as you'll agree, it's just like a really very fascinating topic, and you're just like, it's almost like can't quite believe it's real. There's that sort of feeling about it. And so yeah, just was in the region and spoke to people, and originally it was going to be a documentary idea, but I didn't feel that I could serve the story and serve the sort of the community very well by telling it as a documentary, because there's just so much access that you can't get, and it's such a sensitive topic, and people are, you're dealing with grieving families, you're dealing with people who are still looking for their loved ones, you're dealing with a lot of people who don't want to talk because they have just lost someone that they care about, or it felt inappropriate. I'm sure other documentaries have been made and maybe they came at it from a different angle, but I didn't feel like I could really tell the story the way I wanted as in documentary form. So it's just something that's always stuck with me, and something that I've always wanted to write about.
Yeah, no, and it is interesting because for a lot of people it seemed like a very macabre job to do, and like that fact that it is even a job, like people take umbrage with, because in the reports that I was reading, like they have an issue with it, because they're basically saying that these men like Mr. Jinping, and in the film Old Bo, played by Jizhong Zhang, like they think that they're taking advantage of the grieving families, and that they're basically using death as a way to make money. But then I thought about it, but people who are involved with death, everyone makes money, like on land, you have the undertakers, you have the morticians, You have the forensic psychologists. They all make money. That's their job, dealing with death. And I immediately didn't have a problem with it, because like I faced that personally. I've seen my grandmother's dead body. I was there. I saw her body right after she passed in at home, and I've been to a morgue. I've smelled death. And so like there's a part in that film where like in the beginning where and where like we don't even get to see Old Bo first. Like everyone smells him first, because there's that smell of death, and so I think I can understand what you said, but you think that you couldn't have served the story if you made a documentary, but you made a narrative film, and I think it works that way because you get to humanize who these people are, using the character of Old Bo in a way that I think a documentary wouldn't necessarily do, because like the character stays with you, and like it really makes you think about it. So talk to me about developing the story and like how you just started to develop. Not only have Old Bo, because as you said in research, you would have like the men and the families who do this in China, but you needed someone else to balance out who he is. You needed the victim or the family side of it. So talk to me about developing the story around these two characters.
Yeah, for me it was always Old Bo and that world that, like you described it, like, it's like a very macabre world on the surface of it. You're dealing with death and you're dealing with grief every day. I really wanted to balance him out with Harmonie's character, with Yan, with somebody who was almost came from the opposite, or on the surface came from the opposite. So was like very innocent, very sort of perhaps like naive, and so essentially it kind of, to me, it had to be a child to sort of balance out the story of it. But actually, as we discover, like Old Bo is not what his entire job. He's much more than that. He's got a sense of humor. He has his own backstory, and although he deals with death day in day out and he's a kind of pariah of sorts, he has like a very rich internal life, I think. And like it would take somebody like and a sort of child to kind of bring that out of him, because she sort of comes with no judgment because she is so young, and she maybe, there's lots of whisperings about him in the village, and like everyone has an opinion of him, and because they see his job first and foremost. Whereas I wanted someone younger who maybe didn't necessarily care or follow the strictures of like sort of society, to sort of be like, and to ask questions that other people might not ask, but that as a child you can get you have a sort of a more of a genuine curiosity, so it's just like, why are you doing this, like what does that feel like what is a dead body, how much does a dead body weigh, all of those questions that help break down Old Bo's guard as well.
Yeah, and you, Harmonie, when you auditioned for this film, what was it that made you want to audition for a film like this? Because looking at your IMDb, it's very different to everything else you've done before. It's very dark in tone, but it deals directly with death. And like we were talking before we began recording. I asked you how old you were. Like you're 15, and we don't normally get like 15-year-olds in films. I wish I'm going to switch that up, because in North American films, I'll say. Because I find in a lot of Asian and cinema, like they focus a lot on death a lot, and like you do have younger characters. But for North American cinema, we don't really get a lot of our films filmed in America, where the film is filmed, don't really deal with death directly. Especially as a macabre aspect of this, and especially in real world. And I'm going to make the distinction with real world, because people watching this might think, oh, what about Interview with the Vampire? That's supernatural. That's fiction, where this is very much set in the real world and based on real people and like real situations. So for you, what made you decide to audition for a role like this and for a character and to be involved in a project like this?
Well, initially when I first received the audition, I wasn't thinking of it as a really dark and twisted thing. When I saw it, I was like, oh, like it felt very like real, when I received the script, I felt like this is like storytelling, and I want to tell stories like through film, and that's like something that my acting teachers have always taught me. Like, if you want to do acting, you should be able to tell stories and like do this art. And I think that like this audition, like I was like really happy when I received it. I was like, this is like real storytelling. And sometimes when I receive auditions, like what you're talking about, like the typical like North American type of films, I understand what they're trying to do with it. It's very entertaining, but it's like a very different kind of concept. And I think that like with this, I just wanted to like do the storytelling, and I didn't do that much research when I first received the audition. I didn't know that the corpse fishing was an actual thing until I was on set and I was talking to Jean, and she was like, this is a real thing. I've talked to people who are corpse fishers. And I was like, that's crazy. And I was like, this is like such like an inspiring story to tell, because I think like even like someone like me who is Chinese, I didn't even know this existed. And I'm sure that a lot of like even like mainland Chinese people don't know. So I think through like film like this, we can like spread awareness and like share stories, and like you get like more knowledge of how like the world works, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because as I said, I didn't really know about it as an actual job before, but in watching the film, the first thing that came to my mind is Greek mythology. There's the river Styx. The river Styx is the river of where like you have, I think his name is Charon, and he's the ferryman who carries the souls of those who've passed across the river to from life to either life in the hereafter in Hades or in heaven or in purgatory, and he's paid. Like they put the coin in the mouth, and that's not just in like Greek mythology, just literally all across every culture, indigenous culture around the world. There's an aspect of death, and there's always someone who takes and transitions people to death. Everyone knows about the Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper serves the purpose, and these people always have to be paid. But I mentioned that because in real life, again, like in reading about Wei Xinpeng and like in Obo, like people think they shouldn't be paid for what they're doing. They don't value what they're doing as something worthwhile, and like looking for those who have died, and some of them have died extremely horrific deaths. Some people have committed suicide. Some people have been murdered. Sometimes it was an accident. And like in this film, like what happens is Yan's father, he's missing, and like she believes he got swept away by a flood that happened in the province. And like you have these people who are confronting all of these horrific aspects of death, all the different ways that people die, and it's not an easy job psychologically to deal with, and people think they shouldn't be paid for it, but your film made me think of that as like how people would talk about Greek mythology and make stories about the Grim Reaper and vampires and what have you. But then when it comes to talking about people who actually do face it in real life, it's a problem, and like as I said, like I think the film really does humanize that. And like the character of Yan, she does a very good job of that, because she's young, she looks at him much more open-minded than adults would, like she's curious. And she's like, and she's not, the smile of death doesn't bother her, because as she said, my mom would take me to places where she would clean, and she's like, I've smelled things possibly worse than the body of a decaying cadaver. And so I want to talk first about that aspect of the film, Jean, just about talking about seeing about how it's easier for people to see things in a supernatural fictional setting than in real life, and like how they're able to value the characters in fiction, like again talking about River Styx and Grim Reaper or whatever, but when it comes to valuing the people who actually do this in real life, it's a whole other problem. Like humans are fascinating that way. We're contradictory.
Yeah It's so interesting. I'm really glad that you brought up the kind of mythology comparison, because the like when I was writing, there was like I was like very inspired by it's like the story of Arabian Nights, like the 40 Days and 40 Nights, like how the Arabian Nights story gets told, which is I think like I think the king is going to kill one of his concubines, and she starts telling a story, and then she waits until like right at sunrise. She's like, I'll continue the story tomorrow, which is why it goes on for 40 days and like each day, the story, she ends the story on a cliffhanger, so he has to keep her alive for one more day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like how she kind of like avoids being killed, basically. And so I was like thinking about that and thinking about like that kind of like bargaining and the sort of the structure of that fairy tale when I was writing this. And that's why there's like an element of, okay, they strike a deal. It's 3 days and on the boat in exchange for getting to see a body every day. And yeah, it's just, I think that all those elements that you described of like the river and like taking away life and kind of how symbolic the river is in terms of like crossing between life and death, like all of that, even though the story is very grounded in reality and there's no supernatural elements per se, I still wanted a lot of the feel and the structure of mythology to it. And to kind of traditional fairy tale sort of storytelling conventions, because I think that it's much easier for people to feel empathy and to feel a connection to these kind of like to these characters once you sort of suspend the things around them, or you build this familiar structure around them, rather than like the complication when you give them the context of like how complicated like real life is. Like, you know, I wasn't trying to, I really wanted people to suspend their judgment for this film and to not be like, oh, would I do this? Is he a good guy? You know, is this something that I like? Would I pay him? Would I? Because ultimately he's just a man with a job, and like it's not like, I think it's not about like it's not about his morals. That's not why we're there. And it's just to really get to see him as him doing his work. And so it required stripping back sort of, you know, a lot of the social and kind of cultural context of what was going on. Like, I didn't want to get into Chinese burial rites. I didn't want to get into sort of like, okay, but where are the, you know, is this legal or not legal? Like, that's a whole other thing. And you know, you know, is he really taking advantage of anyone? Like all of this stuff. It's like these questions could be raised, but like in terms of this story, I didn't feel that they were sort of the priority, and it's not what I was looking to address.
No, and I agree, because the thing is, like, for Old Bo, the main thing that you get about his character is he's lonely, you know, and he's aware that he's lonely, you know, he's aware of how people see him. He's aware that not only is he an outcast, but he became an incidental outcast, you know, and like he didn't see to set himself apart from everyone else. He ended up there because he was looking for his own son, you know, his own son was missing, and he realized that there's a need that to be filled, you know, there's a job to be done, and his own grief guided him there, you know, and people and again the real Wei Xinpeng, like that happened to him. Like his son, his own son was missing, and that's how he got into the job, you know. And people aren't gonna people weren't feeling empathy for him, you know, for that. Like you're in this job because your son is missing, you know. And it kind of made me think of, I don't know, Harvey, you might not know this, but there was a show about missing kids. You know, and like the biggest network to find missing kids was started because the host of the show, his own son, was kidnapped. I don't remember what it was, but it was it was one of the first, I guess, because it was like reality shows following the investigative process, and the host, he got into that because his own son was kidnapped. You know, and like he started this whole North American network of looking for missing kids, and I kind of saw Old Bo as that, you know, like he didn't intend to have this be his life, but he saw a need to be fulfilled. And for you, Harmonie, because you didn't realize that Corpse Fishers was a real job, once Jean revealed it to you, how did that change the way you perhaps maybe approached playing Yan? Was there a change in like the way you saw the character, and not only of Yan but Old Bo, and like the concept of the film?
I think it gave like what I was doing more meaning because like obviously the story at first I was like very like shocked about like this like I was like oh this is a really creative script, like how did she think of like corpse fishing as a script, and then when I found out about that I was like oh wow this is like really real and this is like there's a real need. But I think towards my acting it wasn't as much of a like big change because it was like when you're in the character like that is real, like when I was like doing like shots and everything like when for Yan it is real. So I don't think that there was a big change in acting, but I think in my perspective I was like there was definitely shock to that. Yeah.
Okay, and in talking about Yan as a character, she's an interesting character because she says that she's 20 years old, and I did believe her she was 20 years old, so you told me that she actually wasn't. And the reason I believed her was because there's a maturity there that she has, and I think you did a fantastic job in conveying the maturity that Yan has, because you can tell she's someone who has seen a lot of things she shouldn't have seen. She's experienced a lot of things that she shouldn't have had to experience. Like we're introduced to her, she's sitting alone on the pier, and she has like a karaoke machine that people pay her, like they scan the QR code, which is a very trendy thing now in like all across Asia. You walk around with this placard with a QR code and people just scan it, and like they're singing karaoke, my favorite pastime, and she's selling the light up balloons. But I thought it was interesting, like we get to see how both her and Obog are introduced, and the thought just occurred to me, they're alone, but not really, because Yan is sitting on the pier, and behind her is the group of friends who are singing the karaoke. And Obog gets introduced to us. He's alone, but he has 3 bodies on the boat with him. So they're like surrounded by people, alive and dead, but they're still set apart. They're not really a part of them, although he's kind of drifting along almost as like the living dead. You would say the Walking Dead. And Yan, she's a young girl, and she has these people who are partying through her assistant, but she's a kid who shouldn't even be there. She should be home or playing with games, or having a sleepover with her own friends. So talk to me, Harmonie, about just balancing the naivete of a character like Yan, but also the mature aspects, because and I would have to say kudos to the makeup department, like whoever did the makeup, they really did a fantastic job aging you up in the way how your face looks. But a lot of it has to do with your performance. So talk to me about working through how you wanted to perform, Yan.
Well, I think for her, it's that like she's been living alone and she doesn't really have anyone to like support her. So she has to have that maturity, because if she doesn't, she wouldn't be able to survive in this world that she lives in. But there's also like I said, with her backpack, and then like with the script, there's like the curiosity that she already has. So I think she's just like, she's curious and she wants to learn more about the world, but she's kind of trapped at where she is. So this is kind of an opportunity for her to like see like what she can like and explore, because I think that like you can see like in the first shot she's kind of like bored and like tired of what she's not tired of, but like she's been doing this for a while, so it's something new for her. And I think that like sparks some naivety and like her youth again when she like sees old Bo in that boat.
And it's because like a lot of kids like don't understand death. They don't have a true understanding of what death is. So she's curious about him. But there's a scene with old Bo and Yan on the boat, and it's where they're haggling and they're bargaining on if she how to go about the process, because she doesn't have money. She's like, I can't pay you to identify and see if one of these bodies is my dad. But then he's like, you spend 3 days with me, and like each day I'll show you one of the bodies to see if that is. But she's very aware. She's like, I don't want to end up dead like one of these bodies. Like, she's not stupid either. And for you, talk to me about a scene like that, because I think for a scene like that, because it shows that for young girls have to be very aware of the potential danger that they're always in. This is just for females in general. Like we can't just go trusting random men, no matter how harmless they may seem. So talk to me about working with that scene with Jean.
I think the shots, like how we shot the scene, was also really helpful in like how to like display that feeling. But I think for me, it was like the last question that you asked with like being a kid, because when you're a kid you're not taught to be like scared of these things, but as you grow older, like the world tells you like, oh, you have to be aware of this and there's danger from this and like don't touch that, be careful. And I think that that's like the kid in her just like exploring. And like there was like I think our last shot before I wrapped, it was just like looking back at the boat and like seeing like what do I have to lose, because there's like she has to consider like herself. She doesn't have someone to tell her like give her instructions like don't do that, that's so dangerous, why would you do that. But she is also so curious and she has to like make this decision for herself. And I think with the shots and then the script and like being there, it was like it came to life through just like seeing Ian like become a kid and also like have to take in like her stakes and stuff. Yeah.
And Jean, talk about that with that scene in particular, because again, while the scene is about humanizing old Bo and also telling the audience like where Yan is as a character, like she's alone physically and but also emotionally, mentally, but she's also has to still be very aware, cognizant of the world she's living in as a young girl. You know, there's still that danger that no matter what situation, we just can't like fully trust, you know, that something won't happen. So talk to me about that scene, because there's a shot where like she's doing the bargaining and she's very, again, she seems very mature and she's very sure of what she wants. You know, she's very adamant. She's like, I'm going to do this, where this is how it's going to be done. But then when she talks again, like as Harmonie says, when she talks about, you know, the awareness of the potential danger, she grabs onto her backpack, and we see the shot of the little pin, you know, the little rainbow pin with the clouds, and that tells us, the audience, like she's not, even if she really is 20, she's still a young girl, you know, she's still young, she's still vulnerable. So talk to me about that juxtaposition in the film, because if I'm really thinking about it, that is the only shot in the entire film that shows a hint of innocence, because everything is so dark and gray, and it's all about death and morality and all these things. But just this one shot of this pin is the only part in the film, apart from the bright balloons, that really says like there is moments of brightness and sparks. You know, this is a part of who Yan was. You know, this was her innocence, her childhood.
Yeah. So just to clarify, she is a child. She says she's 20, but she's only like Harmonie, how old were you? You were 14 when we shot, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted her to be like a young teen, and she's just lying about her age. And the idea is that she has seen a lot of darkness, like you mentioned, and she's seen a lot of adult things, and then all the adults in her life have disappeared. So, you know, her mom's not there, her dad's not there. She maybe wasn't given the full truth as a kid. She was fed, you know, pieces of information, but sort of like through a very heavily filtered in a very heavily filtered way. So, you know, the way that your parents might be trying to like protect you from the truth when you're younger. And so she only has these half truths. And I think that for the Yan character, something, even though she's been thrust into a very adult situation, you know, she has to make her own living. She's living in some kind of like post-flooded sort of world. There's like a big flood that's been alluded to. She literally takes care of herself. She is very much an adult in a lot of ways because of how she looks and because of her age. You know, she's still treated very much like a child by most of the people in her life who aren't even there. So there's a frustration, I think, with her in the world in terms of like, why can people not see me for who I really am and for what I really have to deal with, which is very heavy, and there's a lot going on. And so when she meets this corpse fisher who's like, oh, you want to see a dead body? Okay, here you go. And like, you know, like immediately there's almost something refreshing in that for her. I think that it's like here is this person who is giving her exactly what she wants on a plate almost. You know, it's like you want to be treated like an adult, like being adult is about dealing with death, and like here you go. And so I think that's initially what piques her interest, and where you see everyone else running and Yan is doing the opposite and kind of like being drawn towards, that's like I think the initial like sort of draw of old Bo and his boat comes down to that. And then I did want to remind the audience that how small she is, and that she is just a child, and that the threat is not just because she's so desperate to prove herself as an adult. That doesn't mean the physical threat that she's potentially facing, whether it's real or not, is a different question. But the situation that she's in is potentially dangerous, and I did want to show that. And that's why there's all these shots where she's like backlit and she's like a very tiny coming down the ramp, and we see her using her backpack almost as like a kind of like a physical shield. To give herself a little bit. It's to provide comfort, and it's also to give herself that distance from the stranger and the situation. But and you really, that like when she's like trying to decide whether she's going to join him on the boat or not, for me, Harmonie does such a great job of kind of externalizing the conflict in her mind, which I imagine would be this man is, or like do I get to be an adult or not? It's like kind of like the first time you step into adulthood is always, it's not like yay, like let's go, and you're jumping straight into it. Normally you're thrust into it, and then only afterwards, when you can process, you're like, you realize like, okay, that meant something hugely significant.
Yeah. You're there's always a moment, I think, for all of us, like once you're an adult, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with age. It just has to do with circumstances or a particular situation. You realize, being an adult is not all it's cracked up to be. You're like, I wish I could go back to the days of being 10 or 12 or 13, or you're like, I don't want to be an adult anymore. But you can't run away from it. And that happens to her, because once Yan gets on the boat, like there's no turning back, and because she has taken a step beyond a realm that she's familiar with. And it may sound trite to say it like this, but it's the realm of death. And the reason I say that is because once you've acknowledged that death is a fact of life, and you see it and you confront it, there's a reality that we all do have to die, but it's about how you die. And the film really does talk about that. It's like, what circumstances led to these people being on this boat with old Bo, like, were they like depressed? Like, what kind of situation in their life that for those who committed suicide that led them to the point where they thought that the river was the only option left, and there were those who were beaten or assaulted, like they were taken advantage of, and like they were killed, and the river was not the option they wanted, but that's where they ended up because people forced them there. So again, that's another aspect of adulthood that Yan has to confront. She has to face all of these realities about how dangerous people can be. She's safe at Old Bo, but then she realizes like there's danger literally around the corner, around the bend. And I want to talk about the metaphor of smell in this film, because smell is ephemeral. Smell can't be seen, like you just sense it. And there's something that happens later in the film, but I want to talk about the first, because I thought it was such a beautiful way to introduce Old Bo. And it's all weird, but I thought it was a very interesting way, because they had said when he's introduced, the characters in the film, they smell him before they see him, And the funny thing is that Yan doesn't smell it. It's the people on the pier that smell it. And she's not even aware of it, because she smells her clothes. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't smell this thing. But he comes, and like the smell is there. And then like she offers him she's like, okay, I can't pay you, so how about I clean the boat for you? And to get rid of the smell, he's like, only God could remove this smell. And it kind of made me think about how while they're talking about the smell of death, I kind of saw it also as like loneliness, like smell in this scent that they're talking about isn't really death. It's the uncertainty, because they're both looking for the same thing. They're looking for a lost loved one, like he's looking for his son and she's looking for her father. And like, that's something that's hanging over them, almost like a dark cloud, like that's the stench the desperation, the loneliness, the thing that's really clinging on to them. So talk to me about that metaphor of smell, because it carries through to the end of the film, where like they don't even smell on each other, anymore. Like for Yan, she accepted the smell before she even really knew what it was, but she became a part of that life. She became an outcast because of that stench, that smell. Because for people, without the smell, people wouldn't even know what old Bo does. Like he would be able to blend in, because for the costuming, I thought was interesting. His clothing is very clean. He wears the white t-shirt, the like blue button-down shirt. When Yan is with him on the boat, she has like the white t-shirt and everything, so he doesn't look dirty. But it's the smell that lets people know that the job that he does. So talk to me about smell and the metaphor of smell in this film.
Yeah, smell is just something I've always really paid attention to. I produced immersive theatre before, back in China as well, and something that was really fun to me and surprising about that was like you're of course like designing the set, and you're choreographing the dance, and you're the lights, the music, and then also the element of smell. Like the directors will literally be choosing scents for each space, and that was really surprising to me, and like kind of like really left an impression on me. I was like, okay, it really does change how an audience perceives what's going on around them, and it's a shame in film we don't get to do that, but it's still very much like weaved. I always think about like what a space smells like now, even when I'm shooting, like what is the smell, and how does it influence the character's feelings. I think consciously or subconsciously it's gonna make you feel a certain way. And I love that you noticed that, like, how different Yan's reaction was to everyone else, because I think for me it was like another way to indicate her lack of judgment towards him. And it's like sort of like these are two similar, I wouldn't say twin souls, but they're two similar souls, and they're kind of like on a wavelength, on the same wavelength that other people maybe can't get to. And where other people hold on to a lot of judgment about corpse fishing and the thing, and it's like it's hard for them to get past, to really even get to know Obo. It just doesn't exist for Yan. Like, she's going straight there, and like there's like a little bit of backstory as to why that is, but really it's just they're able to me, the smell is like kind of like a metaphor for like the judgment. It's like they don't have that for each other, and that's why they're able to connect in such a short amount of time, and to get past the fact that they're on a boat with a lot of dead bodies, and it's just like a very, I think it's what keeps people away, the judgment, the smell, but it's also what allows them to connect, is the sort of the lack of.
Yeah, I think people are afraid of the smell of death. Like I think it's almost like they're afraid that there's this thing where we as human beings, we're taught to fear death. We're taught to fear dead bodies, and we're also taught to be afraid of everything surrounding that, including like the smell of death. And the thing is like, and the thing is like, the reason that has in that certain situation that smell has a death is because these are people whose bodies have been left in water, so it's decomposing and everything. But when you go to a funeral home, and when you're going to attend your funeral and you're doing a viewing, well, in Barbados where I'm from, we would call it a viewing, where like you would have like the body either in the home or like the funeral home or the church, and you would go and look at it and and say like your last respects or prayers or whatever to the person before the actual funeral service. And like there's no smell there, because like like the funeral directors and the morticians, they clean it up. So like that's a clean version of death. But in the film, like you were showing, like death is violent, is dirty, but it also has a smell. But and I think that's what people are afraid of. We're taught to fear death, and for again Yan, like as I think Harmony did such a brilliant job in her performance of Yan. Like Yan isn't afraid of the dead bodies, you know. She's more afraid of what the potential could be, you know, that one of them could be her dad, you know, but she's still also resolute to have that to know for sure if one of these men on the boat could be her dad. But and something else that I think you did in the film, Jean, that I think was really important, where you showed how for these men and the people who do this work in China are abused by the same family members that they're helping. You know, like there's a scene where the wife of one of the men, she identifies him and this is her husband, and she starts out crying, but then she turns her grief into anger and immediately starts assault Olbo, and he doesn't want Yan to see that because he knows it's going to happen because he's accustomed to it, and he doesn't want her to see it. But she runs out to him and she hears the woman beating him, and he says that he considered it almost a part of the service, you know, that he's providing, you know, that is to be accepted, but it's not to be accepted. You know, it shouldn't be accepted that just because you are grieving that you become abusive to someone, you know. And I think a lot of this is where the film, I think, really touches on class, or like class disparities, where again, because they're seen as social outcasts, that people think they can treat them however they want, you know. And then there's like the two men who are there to help this woman take her body away. They just stand there and they watch as she's beating up Olbo, and Yan has to come in and help him. So talk to me about that scene, because I think that was a really important scene to show how you want to feel sympathy for her because she's grieving her husband, but it's as soon as she turns that switch, I'm like, I feel no sympathy for you, lady. No, you need to go and get your behind beat too, because like, why are you beating like, you know, like, why are you beating up this man? And he doesn't even fight back because he thinks that he doesn't have the right to. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. I think that was like the closest to a documentary, that part of the film, in that I've seen it happen a lot, and just in China and elsewhere in the world, I just think that there's like a lot of people feel a strong sense of powerlessness, and it is a really hard feeling to deal with. And when you don't have like an obvious outlet or target for your anger or for your grief, then it just becomes the next person you come into contact with. And I've seen a lot, like, just like, really, it feels almost like sort of like mindless, just outbursts of, like, random outbursts of anger and of, just totally disproportionate to say, like, what happened. And it's, unfortunately, as you mentioned, it's usually at somebody that they know will not fight back. So could be at like an Uber driver or their waiter or someone, like, some random person on the street. But it's just, to me, it's just a symptom of, like, okay, I am powerless to actually do anything, and like I'm aware of that, but it's still this feeling that I need to like let go of, and like there's no way to like use, like, to kind of harness it into a useful energy, and so it just gets unleashed in like on people like Obo. And it was just something that I really wanted to show on film in that way. This sort of like interesting class dynamic, I think, that, I mean, it happens among all classes, but it's always directed downwards. So, the next, and so, it was like very, that kind of was like a very important truth that I wanted to show. Again, couldn't really film it for a documentary, but it's just something that I wanted to capture.
And for you, Harmony, talk to me about working with Jizhong, who plays Obo, with these scenes, because like she sees him as being vulnerable, but she also sees him as someone that could provide something that she needs, which is like helping her to find her dad. But she sees him get beat up as well. Talk to me about working with him and like just like seeing how, like, we talked a bit about your character, but I want to know how you yourself felt about this character of Old Bo, and working with the actor who played him.
I think it was really fun to work with him, and it's funny because he actually fishes a lot in real life. Like he fishes a lot, and then it was like he would talk about this, and Jean was saying this about how in his previous roles he always has like a fatherly figure type of like role, and I think that he just kind of brings that energy to his like acting and to his roles, and I think it was like really like he was really fun to work with, and it was like he. I think like for me acting in those scenes it was like because he doesn't show like too much emotion throughout like a lot of like the first part of he's like kind of like he's protecting himself I think in a way, and I think that for me I was just like curious and I just kept asking questions, and I think I was just like trying to break his shell is what I was trying to do. And yeah, I think it was like introducing myself to someone, and like I think for me as like my character Yan, like she doesn't get like too much like connection to anyone else in society anyway, so I don't think she's like angry at like the like not like the lack of a reaction that he has to some of the questions that she's asking, but I think that she's kind of used to it, and like just someone to talk to for both of them, like in that like bargaining of like whether or not I go on the boat in that scene. It was also for him it was also that way. He was like, it's nice to talk to you, why don't you come on the boat with me?
And then so like they have that relationship, they're kind of forming a friendship, but she's again a child, she's a teenager, and she's seeing the power dynamics that exists between adults. She's seeing the woman beat him up, and she doesn't understand it. Like she asks him, why didn't you fight back? And he's like, but I'm kind of providing a service. And like I want to ask you now about power dynamics. About seeing how adults, because for I as a teenager once upon a time, thought that adults had all the power. I didn't understand that that there's levels and hierarchies in society. I only saw that I as a child and other children being talked down to by adults, but she's getting to see how he as an adult gets treated by others. That there's that power dynamic. There's that level in society, that hierarchy. So for you, I want to ask you about your perception of not only just in the film but life in general, about coming to the realization that everything isn't equal. That we're all not on equal footing in society.
Yeah, I think for the film, for my character and everything, I think Jean did a really good job of like showing off like the power dynamics in that shot, and I was watching it all like happen when we were on set, and I think it was like a really big moment for discovery for Yan, and I think that like you said, like we all like at some point in our lives like figure that out, and I think that like with the world changing and like with like the fact that like the internet's so fast and you can see like everyone anywhere in the world, it's that like you can see it from your own room, like you can see like the power dynamics like forming, but it's like it's really different now. I feel it's like especially in the US it's like really different from like how it is in China for the power dynamics. I think like for here sometimes it's not even like you don't even get the interaction, but you still like the power dynamics are still there. You don't get the interaction of like someone low class and high class. Like you don't get to have that connection of like they're literally directly putting you down, but like you still feel that like maybe in your work, maybe like when you just like in everyday like stuff that you do, it just happens that way. And like maybe like coffee prices or gas prices, like you see the price and you're like, wow, that's crazy. But for like I think for like society, I think it's like economically, I guess it's like really obvious, and I think like that's just like something that I'm like seeing as I'm growing up, is that like as I'm like more aware of like how money works and how like job is gonna work in like college and everything, because that's like something really prevalent to like everyone my age right now is like college. It's like you see people who are like in like better off families or other stuff, they can get into college like that, like they can get into like really good colleges, or like, and like for people who are less well off, they have to work like 6 times as hard, 10 times as hard. I think that's like what really like shows through to like my age right now during this time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like what you guys are facing is nowhere close to what we were facing in my age. I'm 41 now, right? So I was a I was a teenager in the 90s and the early 2000s, and being able to look back and see, and I think, and like just look the kind of films that you're seeing the difference in the type of stories. You know, a lot of the stories and the shows that I watched didn't really focus a lot on things like economics in that particular way, but there's a lot more films I think that are, or I should say, there were a lot more films. I would say probably maybe like 4 to 7 years ago that dealt a lot with that, but we're not really seeing it now. And for I have my niece and my nephew. My niece is she just turned 18, and my nephew he's turned 23. And the things that they have to worry about now, I was like, I thought I had it hard, you know, the reason I asked you that is because I think it's very important for people to realize what young people your age are experiencing, and like that you're very much aware of the world that you live in. You know, like you guys are not oblivious, as some people think. You know, like people think that children and teenagers aren't aware. You know, and I just wanted to give you your chance to talk about it, because also people never underestimate what children are capable of. You know, never underestimate what they're seeing and what they're hearing, you know, and what they're thinking. And so thank you for telling me that, because I think it's important that people realize, yeah, the kids see what's happening, you know, and again, in the film kind of does reflect on that, because like for Yan, she's very much aware of the world she lives in. The film is set in China, that is filmed in Los Angeles, and again, we're going to talk about this, Jean. It's filmed in LA, but it's supposed to be set in the Hubei province of China, and while the film is talking about a very central Chinese society and class and social structure and job, the themes of economics, you know, the themes of stress, social stress, being an outcast, is universal. You know, like kids everywhere, like they can feel like social outcasts in their school. You know, they can feel like they don't communicate with their parents. You know, they can have an absentee parent in at home. You know, and the film does talk a lot about that. And so for you, Jean, I want you to talk about just like those elements of the film, like where while the film is supposed to be set in another country, like there's still the universal theme of, again, like classism, economics, you know, like feeling like a social outcast. You know, like there's a scene where she, like Yanis, she's talking about in the future. You know, she's talking, oh, like, you know, we're gonna do this tomorrow, whatever. And she's seeing herself having a life on this boat with Obo, and he realizes, wait, what am I doing? I can't have you become a social outcast with me, you know. And I think like that's where you see his protective instincts coming. Like, I don't want you to have a future in this, you know, in this life. This isn't the future that you should have. So talk to me about that, about making the film very much having these universal themes of like adults should want things better for children. You know, like you shouldn't want a child to stay bogged down in the life that you have if it's so hard.
Yeah. That is something that, I'm not sure if you're aware of, if it came up in any of your research, but I was very pregnant when I made the film. I was 7.5 months pregnant when we shot. As Harmonie will attest, I was walking around set with a bump. And it was my first child. I had a baby girl, and I think I delivered the film one day after I delivered my baby in the end. And so, yeah, it was like something that was very much on my mind as I was making this, was kind of, what future are we leaving for our children? And just thinking about, yeah, like legacies and things like that. And, you know, when I wrote I wasn't pregnant when I wrote the film, but I wrote the film thinking about something completely different. I was thinking more about grief and kind of closure, truth, and having also lost a friend. And then meeting Harmonie kind of took, and then finding out I was pregnant, it sort of like took on this like unexpected turn towards thinking about sort of just our relationships with like my relationship with like my child self, and like how I wish I had been protected. And then also like at the same time realizing that like you can only do so much for your child, and before what is your role as a parent, and like, is it to protect them from everything, or is it to just sort of equip them with the tools to be able to sort of like go out into the world and like trust that they'll be good people, and that they can recognize other good people, and like that they know how to operate in the world. And it was really impactful for me working with Harmonie and being able to see how strong she was and how intelligent she was, despite her like young age, and it made me very hopeful. And I was just blown away by like her strength, and I thought it was like a great, like, that ending is like, it really comes, like, it shines through. I don't know if I even gave much direction for that scene at the end there, but like I think that was all just Harmonie. I think I was like, just like, find sort of like, your most like angry, stronger self, and like you really see her like expand on screen, I feel, and like that's like, real Harmonie like coming through. But yeah, that's sort of why that's what we were exploring. Is this big feeling of the future, and that's who you hear in the background. It's like my daughter just like but yeah, it was unexpected, but I'm glad that the kind of it all happened during production.
No, because I read a couple of pieces where everyone was talking about, where people were saying the film is about morality and death and all this stuff. I'm like, it is, but then they also kind of took it as the film as being about just like having hope for the future, wanting better for the future, and like found family. Like, I'm a sucker for found family stories. Like, those are when I watch dramas, those are like my favorite types of dramas. But the film is very much about, to me, I don't really see the film being very much about darkness. I see it very much more about looking for using like the pin as a metaphor and the rainbow, after the storm, like I'm a very metaphorical person, but like the way I saw it is like the flood that took everything from Yan, the flood that brought these bodies to also brought these bodies to Old Bo, and like that's how he makes his living. But it also gave Yan a chance to meet someone who could help her in life, like an adult that she could rely on, and it brought these two lost souls together to start something that could change both of their lives for the better, like there is a rainbow there for them, like there is that sense of like she could remind Obo of like, while his son may be gone, she could remind him of like youth, like the exuberance of youth, and like how children are always optimistic, and how children are always, they don't know their own limitations, so they'll do as much as they can for how long they can, and he's there to guide her and say like, you should want better for yourself, he's able to guide her. So I kind of saw the film as actually a very hopeful film, and we're gonna wrap up soon, but one of the last things I want to talk about is the cinematography. I think the cinematography in this film is fantastic. And your cinematographer's name is Pip White, and I was looking and I think she did a fantastic thing with this film, where again like the film has kind of like a dark overtone because a lot of it is shot at night, and then like in the day where they're on the river, it kind of has like an overcast feel to it. But she does, I think there's a lot of close-up shots of both characters, like Harmonie gets a lot of close-up shots and Old Bo get a lot of close-up shots, and I think that has to do a lot to humanize them to us, the audience, where like it's not about this boat of death, it's about these two characters. So talk to me about working with Pip and figuring out the look and feel of this film, because it matches with the music. And let me look up the name of the Samuel, right? Yeah, Samuel, who did the music, because it kind of has this ringing of bells, like there's this thing of ringing of bells that features a lot in the music, and that kind of again made me think of the river Styx, like because on the boat that Sharon would have, like there's a pole and there's a bell that he would ring every time he's carrying a lost soul across the river. So talk to me a bit about that, the technical aspects of the film with that.
Yeah, so I'll just start with the music first, which is for my reference music, I had given so Sam is not a traditional film composer. he makes pop music. He's like a music producer, but not he doesn't score films. And I've worked with him before on some other things. And what I really like about working with him, the process of working with him, is that he is always willing to experiment, because he doesn't come from a traditional film scoring background. You know, he doesn't think like, okay, sad, automatically like strings or whatever. He's very open to playing with different unusual instrumentation. And all of the reference music that I brought to him, there was a lot of have you seen Rian Johnson's film Brick? It was like his very first feature film, but it has like a lot of like eerie kind of, like, they sound a little bit like wind chimes, but they're not wind chimes. Like, we were reading about sort of like how they created that sound. I think he used his cousin Nathan Johnson as the composer, and Nathan Johnson had used he was like playing around with like his kitchen cabinets, and, you know, it wasn't anything that you could like put a name to. It wasn't like, oh, that's a violin, or like, oh, that's a brass instrument. It was just like unusual and eerie, and it was worked so effectively for what they did. And so Sam and I talked about doing something similar. It's like, let's not use an instrument that people are easily able to identify as like, okay, this is obviously the piano, or this is obviously. And so I actually don't know what he ended up using in the end, but we listened to so many different, like, sort of, you know, he was messing around with like forks and glasses and like just all sorts of things lying around the house to like create that kind of like bell sound. But it sounds like a bell that's not, and I think that's it. It does a lot to contribute to that slightly off. It just throws you off, I think, as an audience member, because you're not sure what you're hearing, and therefore you're not sure what to expect. It's not the traditional like cinematic shorthand of like, I'm hearing a harp, an angel is going to come down, or, you know, I'm oversimplifying, but you you understand. And so that's kind of really the approach that we took to the music, and I thought he did a great job of just kind of really throwing everyone off. When it comes to like the old boy theme, as we call it. And then Pip is fantastic to work with. I've worked with her before, and she's never been to China, even though the whole thing is set in China. So that was already like the first big challenge, and so like having to explain to her that like the one thing about China, this is like the one thing about the quality of the air to me in China is that like it's really thick with pollution, especially in the area that like the story is set. Is there's so many factories, and so like it's really beautiful, the light, but because it's like so gray and dense, and sometimes like yellow with smoke, like, you know, like it's like a really diffuse sunset, sunrise that you get. Like it's like, and we like looked at lots of photographers and other like, you know, people that had shot in the area, and like tried to get as like close to that as possible, in because we were restricted, like we had to shoot in LA. So, you know, very different air quality here. And so we were like, okay, well, how can we use like color to sort of recreate that that sort of like, I can't describe it other than a heaviness. There's just like
I know
the air.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because I watch a lot of Chinese dramas and films and stuff, and I swear I'm not even lying when I said I thought the film was actually filmed in China until I saw the credits and they said, "Oh, filmed in LA." I was like, "What?" Like, of the United States. I'm like, "This was not filmed in China." I swear, you guys did a fantastic job on that. So like, just like, I got to tell you that, because I legit, I was looking at the pictures from like, especially the 2010 report. There's pictures of the quarry, like, you know, that featured like where he would put the bodies to like this to lay them up for the family to look. Looks just like that. So I legit thought you guys went to the province.
Southern California and Long Beach, like all the way. Never ever left. Did we even leave the 30-mile zone? I don't think we did. No. We were within 30 miles of LA at all times.
And so while we're wrapping it now, I want you both to talk to me about how this film changed the way you thought about death and relationships after film, because it's been a while now. You've had time to sit with the film and think about it. Like, how has the film, or and then thinking about the film changed about the way you both think about relationships between people, but also the way you perhaps think about death. It may seem a bit dark for me to answer that question, Harmony, but I'm going to ask you because you are a very mature young lady.
For me, I think like what you said about like death being really scary. I think for me that was definitely like really real for like most of my life. Like I was like super afraid of death. Like, but I think that this like made it less scary in a way. I don't know, but because my character is definitely like still, she's definitely very like grossed out, not very grossed out, but like she's scared of the dead body. She was like heaving over the boat and stuff. But I think for me it was like it brings it like sort of like it's like stuff goes on after death, and it's like it's not like I don't know. I feel like it just got like less scary, and I think like I think for me, I didn't connect to the death part as much as I connected to like the connections between like human beings, because I think for like Yan, it wasn't like so much about the death. It was about like her dad, and it was about old Bo, and it was about all that. So it was not so much about the death, but it was more about like the connections to be made after death. And like I think it's like grief as well. It's like grief between like people, and like how it can connect people is what my perspective changed on. Because for me, I felt like for like death would always be like this like horrible devastating thing, and of course it's not great. But I think for me it like showed me the script and like how it came together. It was like the death and the grief can like bring people together. It like completely like out of nowhere, it can bring people together. Yeah.
Yeah. For you, Jean.
Yeah, I think something similar, which is I don't know. I think that before I lost my friend, and before I sort of started embarking on this film, I maybe had more of an idea of like death, of grieving as like a finite thing. It's like, you know, the idea of like getting over something, and like you have your mourning period and things like that, and it's like sort of something to be done in private, and then once you're like better, quote unquote, you then like resume your previous life, and it's almost like an illness or something to like recover from. And this film, and you know, was a kind of like an exploration of what I was going through, and working through it with other people. It's kind of, I've come to think of it less of that, and grieving is something that it's just like it's just a different state, and it's not something to necessarily ever get over. And it's, I think, is an importance in sharing it with others. And it's not something to be like sort of like your grieving self is not something to be hidden away. I think that doesn't really help so much as like, you know, to let people know that you're grieving and that it comes and goes. And I think to make people feel more comfortable with the idea of like grief, and it's every day, and it can be funny, and it's not just like a one sort of like dimensional like sadness. They're like, oh, they're grieving. It's like, you know, some grieving people can still make jokes. Grieving people are, you know, see like the dark humor and stuff, and it's just this like constant ongoing process. And actually there's something really beautiful when you share it, and the more people who understand it, the more manageable, I suppose, it feels, but it doesn't go away.
No, I agree with both of you, because like the film made me really think about how we treat people who deal with death, you know, as in a professional setting. But again, as you're both saying, it's about the relationships that you form through and after death. You know, like there is life after death. You know, like someone dies, but the family and the friends still have to carry on. You know, like you and to me, grief is a constant thing, because like you mean think of my grandmother has been dead, I think about 25 years now, and I still think of her. You know, I still think of how she used to call me little girl, You know, like sometimes I'd smell something and it would make me think, it would make just randomly make me think of her, you know, and like, and the grief is ever constant, like you miss that person. You like, you know, there's a moment in your life where you realize, and it does, and it's not an instantaneous thing. Once after they dead, you realize they're gone. Like no, like sometimes it can happen like weeks or months after. It's like months after my grandmother had passed, then I realized, oh wait, she's not coming back. You know, and like that's a process of like constantly missing someone, but you just miss them to degrees, you know. And then there's, and so like I think the film really did make me think of like how we relate to death and how we relate to people who are connected to death, you know. And like it made me think of how people like old Bo and like Xinpeng in China, they should be, I think they definitely deserve more respect for what they're doing, because they are doing something that provide some kind of solace for families, and even for those who don't have the families, they're acknowledging the death of these people. You know, they're not just leaving them there, you know, because if they did, like the bodies, the rivers would be overflowing with bodies, you know. And but they're providing a service. But yeah, the film really made me think of how we treat people who are connected to death in such a, I think, a direct and intimate way. But thank you so much for taking, both of you, for taking the time, for talking with me, and for making this film. And I didn't know what to expect when I pressed play, but I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to speak to both of you today.
Thank you so much for all your questions, Carolyn. It was really fun to speak to you about death. But yeah, it was great to, and also great to do an interview with Harmonie as well. I feel like that's such a treat. I never get to, I never get to do an interview with anyone else.
Yeah, when was the last time that you guys got to do an interview? Like Harmonie has said the last one you did was in Tribeca. You guys haven't done
Yeah, it was probably on the red carpet at Tribeca.
Ooh, that was a while ago. I'm glad that my interview facilitated you guys able to chat again.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's always good to, yeah, see the people you've worked with, and like, yeah, it's so much of the film like hinges on Harmonie's performance. And so yeah, I always feel weird when I'm just like talking about it myself. I'm like, well, you could ask Star.
No, like, but Harmonie and Jizhong, they both carry they are the film. Honestly, like it is very much about their relationships and their performances. And I'm honestly truly impressed by you, Harmonie, because as I said, I swear to God, I thought you were legit 20 years old. And so I think you did a fantastic job, and you have a very bright future.
Thank you so much. This is really fun.
Thank you. I'm glad you both enjoyed it.